That was crazy. We definitely have some winners and losers, and one of the biggest is the Dallas Mavericks. This is a team that barely had their selection in the first place. It took an end of the season tank fest and a tiny bit of luck in the lottery for it not to go to the Knicks. Then over the last few days, it seemed like they were going to go with Dereck Lively. Without a trade, that is probably who they would have taken. They still ended up getting him, but they traded down to 12 and in the process unloaded the contract of Davis Bertans, creating a $17 million traded player exception. That is massive. Dereck Lively is also a great prospect, someone I had ranked inside my top 10, and you really couldn't ask for a much better fit. This is someone that came out of high school as the #1 ranked player in the country. While on paper it looks like things went terribly at Duke, averaging just 5 points a game, he was one of the best defenders in college basketball. He sent back over 2 shots a game. The rim protection is clearly there, but his defense is actually even more intriguing at the NBA level. He has a ridiculous frame, 7'1" with a 7'6" wingspan. He pairs that with elite lateral speed, something that is vital in today's league, and ultimately why his upside is through the roof. On top of that, he turned a lot of heads during the pre-draft process for a skill set most didn't know he had, and that's 3-point shooting. For a guy that took just 13 threes this season, to be shooting like this, open gym or not, is impressive. The form alone is promising. This is not a Mitchell Robinson dribbling in the offseason situation. Shooting will be a part of Lively's game, maybe not from day one, but the pre-draft process showed that while the defense is getting all the attention, the offense still has a ton of untapped potential. Again, he was the #1 player in the country a year ago. Their night wasn't even over after that. They would use the trade exception to make a deal with the Kings that brought in Rashawn Holmes, who's become not a great contract, but still might be a decent piece for them. In the process, they got the 24th overall pick in the draft, which they used to get one of the top defenders in the class, Marquette wing Olivier Prosper. The Mavericks aggressively attacked defense tonight, which was clearly their biggest need. I think they might have been a little impatient on that second trade, but they still emerged as massive winners. It's crazy that dropping down just to 11, none of this would have been possible. Another huge winner is the New Orleans Pelicans. If you guys have been watching or follow me on Twitter, you know I'm extremely high on Jordan Hawkins. I really believe he's one of the most underappreciated and underrated prospects we've ever seen. Leading UConn to the title is what jumps out, but Hawkins was torching defenses all season. He was nothing short of unguardable. Now, he wasn't doing much off the dribble, but Hawkins is the best shooter in this draft. We need to emphasize, we're not talking about corner catch and shoot threes. He's the best off-ball mover in this entire class. One of the best we've ever seen at this stage in his career. In another life, he might have been taken a few months earlier in the NFL draft as a wide receiver. But beyond the movement, his contested shooting is absurd. His movement shooting is remarkable. From day one, he'll not only be able to knock down good looks, but create them without needing the ball in his hands. Something that's massive coming into the league with few shot creation opportunities available to young players. There are concerns about the frame, for some the potential, which is baseless, but at the end of the day, I will die on the hill that the Pelicans just landed an incredible prospect. I firmly believe one of the biggest steals of the draft. The landing spot is also a match made in heaven. I really wanted to see Hawkins do what he does best, contribute to winning at basketball. Going to New Orleans, he has the opportunity to do that. There's definitely some serious question marks surrounding Zion Williamson and his future health, but what we do know is when he was out there, the Pelicans were one of the best teams in the league, and that's not an understatement. They already have some of the most depth and now are adding in Hawkins. Now, one of the knocks on him is that despite being a respectable defender in college, his physical profile might limit that ability at the NBA ranks. Well, if that concern becomes reality, there's really not many better landing spots to negate that. Truly a great selection and perfect fit. Then we've got to talk about the Houston Rockets. I mean, wow. Who would have thought this is how their draft would have gone? A few days ago, we saw the odds shrink at the 4th overall pick. It was starting to become more and more likely that Villanova's Cam Whitmore would be the 4th overall pick. He never became the favorite, but he emerged as a serious candidate for the Rockets. But even if that didn't happen, it was nearly consensus that he would go to the Pistons at 5. He was by all accounts an elite prospect and likely a top 5 pick in the draft who everyone was raving about during the pre-draft process. But then things got a little weird. Yesterday, we start to hear that the Pistons are probably not going Whitmore and have now switched their focus to Asar Thompson due to concerns raised with Whitmore's medicals. Well, those concerns didn't just stop the Pistons from drafting him. It turned into one of the biggest draft night falls we've ever seen, making Michael Porter's in 2018 look like a joke. He would go with the 20th overall selection. The team at 20, the Houston Rockets, a team that just a couple of days ago, as we said, Vegas thought had a real chance to select Whitmore at 4. A selection they would end up using to get an incredible prospect in Amin Thompson. They are one of the most no-brainer winners we have ever seen. Draft falls can get crazy. A big part of them can just be as simple as teams just not expecting it. They spend so much time scouting, working out, and preparing to select guys they expect to be on the board. It's a massive decision to suddenly pivot to a player like Whitmore who you spent no time focusing on. As of the time I'm recording this, the whole injury situation is super vague. The best I can find is concerning medicals. We don't even know if all the teams had access to the same information. Maybe there's more to this. Maybe there's more off the court. But the 20th pick in the draft doesn't usually produce a good player in the first place historically. It could be a huge whiff for the Rockets, but it's still an incredible selection. The concerns may be valid, but at the end of the day, they walked away with two guys that 2 days ago were both supposed to go inside the top 5. If you told someone over the weekend that the Rockets were about to get Cam Whitmore and Amin Thompson, they wouldn't believe you. If you told them that they did it without a trade, they would probably start laughing. It's a crazy situation. Another clear winner is the Utah Jazz. Through all the noise, all the surprising picks, they did exactly what it looked like they should do. They grabbed the clear top value on the board at 9 and Taylor Hendricks, someone that's coming in with a crazy physical profile and elite defensive versatility. He pairs that with knockdown shooting as he shot nearly 40% from 3 this season as a freshman at UCF. Then at 16, they go with Keontae George, one of the best shot creators in the class. One of the few in this class with true, high volume, #1 option upside. The efficiency wasn't great at Baylor this season, but that's why they're able to get this level of talent at 16. They address 2 holes while balancing risk and reward beautifully. Then they finish things off by going with Bryce Sensabaugh, a 6'6" wing that was one of the best freshman scorers in the country. Without some injury concern that creeped up towards the end of the year, he would have been going way higher than this. If you're a Utah fan, I really think you should be jumping for joy with what we saw tonight. Even at the top of the draft, we had a very clear winner, and that's the Portland Trail Blazers. They're actually winners for multiple reasons. For one, they didn't jump the gun. They didn't trade the 3rd overall pick for a win-now guy just to be a fringe playoff team. That might still happen, but for now, they didn't do that. That alone makes them winners here, but they're also winners for who they ended up getting. They were able to draft Scoot Henderson, someone that in the eyes of most is the clear second best prospect in the draft, someone that in most years would likely go 1st overall. Getting the opportunity to draft someone like that at 3 is rare. Now, I think it would be a mistake, but if they still have hopes of making a trade involving this selection, they definitely benefit from it being Scoot rather than Brandon Miller. At the end of the day, people debate Scoot versus Miller, but right now it's pretty hard to debate their value post-selection. The market for Scoot is just way higher. Then they proceeded to get Chris Murray at 23, someone that was one of the best players in the country this season as just a sophomore, and is also the twin brother of the 4th overall pick from last year, Keegan Murray. He has one of the highest floors in this draft and is nearly a guaranteed day 1 contributor. They likely grabbed 2 of the best values in the entire draft. Now this brings us to one of the biggest losers of the draft, the Charlotte Hornets. Brandon Miller is an elite prospect. There is no denying that. He was one, if not the top player in the country as just a freshman. He's a 6'9" knockdown shooter. He was built for the modern game. He could very well have a much better career than Scoot. But the reasons the Blazers were winners are the exact same reasons the Hornets are losers. There was a lot of conversation about the Hornets making a trade, potentially one with New Orleans. All those deals were centered around the chance to get Scoot Henderson. The same market is not there for Brandon Miller. The one lesson history should tell us when it comes to the draft is drafting fit over talent is and will always be the wrong decision, no matter what. This fit alongside Melo likely factored in way too much. Now, I'm not that big of a Scoot believer, at least to the level of most, but at the end of the day, it's hard not to recognize the value, the overall roster building flexibility he would have brought to Charlotte. Now, I do think they made an incredible selection with their 2nd first-round pick, drafting Nick Smith Jr., someone that came into the season looked at as a top 10, potentially top 5 selection. He would deal with injuries, struggle with his efficiency, but even coming into draft night, it felt like the lottery was still even in the cards. They were able to get him at 27. Wild considering he's bringing some of the most upside in this class. The only weird thing about it is, his fit is also not the best in Charlotte. They went with talent. If only they did that all night, they would have had a home run of a draft. A team I also feel like came out as losers is the Orlando Magic. They made 2 pretty surprising selections tonight, the first of which being Anthony Black. Now you've got to feel for them. Black probably wasn't at the top of their board. They didn't envision leaving the draft with him tonight. For weeks, it seemed like that player would be Asar Thompson. But unfortunately, this whole Cam Whitmore situation unfolded, leading to the Pistons going with Thompson and forcing the Magic to make a decision they didn't expect to be making. Now Anthony Black is a great prospect. He He's an oversized point guard who's a great playmaker and defender, but the shooting and overall scoring has a ways to go, making him not quite an ideal fit in Orlando. Now, there probably wasn't a better selection, but they're still losers with what unfolded ahead of them. Now, their place as losers was emphasized with their second selection, going with Jet Howard at 11, someone most were expecting to be in the late teens, early 20s, a team like Golden State at 19. He's definitely an intriguing prospect. He's massive for the guard position at 6'8", and he's a really solid shooter, shooting 37% from 3 on high volume. But this was a reach, especially if the goal was to attack shooting. Two of the best shooters to grace the draft were still on the board, that being Grady Dick and Jordan Hawkins. Now, it's the draft. Nothing is a guarantee, but sometimes there are situations where there's just consensus value. The Magic are definitely trying to build something unique. That is blatantly clear. They could now be looking at a lineup of 6'7" Anthony Black, 6'8" Jet Howard, 6'10" Franz Wagner, 6'10" Paolo Banchero, and 6'10" Wendell Carter. It sounds crazy, on paper it looks insane, but we should all know the game is not as simple as that. I think the Magic saw an opportunity for a situation like this, and they were just chasing it a little bit too much. For obvious reasons, Cam Whitmore is another massive loser. It really is an unfortunate situation. Now, we all know there's a big difference between being drafted at 5 and drafted at 20, but just how big exactly? Well, when you go 5th overall, you make $6 million your first year. Over the course of your 4-year contract, you make roughly $30 million. Dropping down to 20, that goes to around the vet minimum of $2.4 million and $11 million across the 4-year contract. So yes, over the course of the last 24 to 48 hours, Cam Whitmore potentially lost around $20 million bucks. That is insane. I'm not nearly as high on the Thunder's draft as most, taking on a bad contract to go up a couple spots to get Cason Wallace, who was probably going to be on the board with the Orlando Magic deciding to take Anthony Black earlier. I'm fine with the player, but I think taking the risk, given the really solid backup options, would have been worth it. Sacramento's draft did not go as planned. They were able to get out of the Holmes contract, which is massive, but in the process, they gave up their first rounder. There likely still would have been options down the road to get out of that Holmes contract and create the space they did. Ultimately, what probably happened is they had a guy at the top of their board, a guy they were ready to draft and would have, that being Chris Murray, but he was selected 1 pick prior to the Blazers. How special would it have been to have the Twins back together? Not just that, but as significant contributors to a team on a massive uptrend. I think once he went off the board, they pivoted. I don't mind the pivot, but they likely lost out on their guy in Chris Murray. Then we've got some winners that are players. You've got Brandon Podziemski, who went 19th overall to the Warriors. This is a player that a season ago averaged a point a game, but after transferring and dominating at Santa Clara, he's now a top 20 pick in the draft. Incredible. This is something we rarely ever see. The fit is a little odd, but that's really only because they just brought in Chris Paul. Looking past this season, I think it's great. Jaime Jaquez has to be jumping for joy. This is a type of prospect we just don't see get much attention anymore. Someone that doesn't really excel at any one thing, doesn't have a physical profile that jumps off the page, and someone that played all 4 years of college. But this is also someone that does everything on the court and brings energy everywhere. He's selfless and clearly committed to winning. He also showed a ton of promise throughout the draft process, especially in the shooting department. But most mocks throughout the season, and even leading up to draft night, had him going in the 2nd round. That didn't happen. Not just that, he went 18th overall to the Miami Heat, a match made in heaven. If it wasn't clear that the Heat value culture over anything, it should be now. There really isn't a prospect that embodies that culture more than Jaquez. When I saw this selection come through, I just started laughing. I think this is one of those scenarios where a lot of landing spots could have likely led to a pretty short career for Jaquez. The Heat aren't one of them. In fact, they are the best landing spot, and it's not even close. Then we've got Derek Whitehead, a guy that was once a projected top pick, but dealt with injuries throughout the year, injuries that had many thinking he would go in the 2nd round tonight. He ended up going 22 to the Nets. An interesting landing spot when you consider that's only 1 selection removed from Cam Whitmore. Whatever is going on with Whitmore must be serious. That was wild.